Hey everyone, Lauren from A Girl and Her Wool here. So back in late November, right before Vlogmas started, I started a series here on my channel, kind of with some more behind the scenes looks of me and my hand-dyed yarn business. So if you are newer to my channel, it's a crafty channel, but I do show a lot of behind the scenes of me as a dyer. So I do my dye with me videos every other Tuesday, and then I do day in the life vlogs that focus on me running my business, and then just other crafty things. And so I started this series really with poor planning because I started it right before Vlogmas, and my intention was to do this series every other Tuesday, kind of opposing Tuesdays of my dye with me vlogs. And so then we went into Vlogmas, and I decided I wasn't going to be doing any other vlogs besides Vlogmas. And so we are now about a month or so later, and I'm just now going to part 2. So if you haven't already watched the first video in the series, it was called Why I Started My Hand-Dyed Yarn Business. And I will leave a link to it down below in the description. You can also get a quick Cliff Notes version by heading over to my blog at agirlandherwool.com. I also wrote a post about it there. And so today we're just going to be talking about how I started, so kind of the second step in it. Last time we talked about why I started, a little bit of background into me as a crafter, and then why I wanted to have my own business. And so today we're going to be talking a little bit more about how. I do want to say up front that this is not meant to be a how to start a hand-dyed yarn business. This is just me reflecting on things I did at the beginning, and my hope is that over time, as I do these videos and look back, it'll be fun to see the progress in how I've changed, which is why I really want to do these vlogs, is that before I know it, I'm gonna forget what things were like at the beginning. And so while I'm still in it, I just wanted to reflect on it, talk about like kind of what's important to me now and what I see in the future, and then in the future be able to compare that back. So so yeah, it is not meant to be a how to start a business. It's just going to be a reflection of how I started and the things that I did at the beginning. So I mentioned in the why I started a hand-dyed yarn business blog that hand-dyed yarn always kind of interested me. I was always curious in the same way that people ask me now. I was very curious about how the different colors stayed separated, how you could get dye to stay in just one spot, how speckles worked. I had crazy things in my head trying to explain how it all worked, and I think with a lot of things I really like to know how things work, and so I always was trying to like figure that part of it out. And so yeah, I was always intrigued by it. And so again, and I talked about this in the why I started, but I just wanted to learn how hand dyeing yarn works. And the type of learner that I am, we're all different learners, we all learn in different ways, but the type of learner I am is a doer. So if I'm a note taker, I can't learn unless I'm taking notes. I don't learn just by absorbing it, I have to write it down. I also like have to work through problems, like things don't make sense until I really write the problem out and figure it out. And so I figured the same thing would happen with dyeing. I wouldn't get it until I got my hands dirty and tried it out for myself. And so that's what I decided to do. I did head over to Knit Picks, which is an online crafty supplier, and they sell undyed bare yarn at a really reasonable price. And so I figured that's what I would start with. So I bought some bare yarn, I think like their stroll fingering weight yarn, and I think I bought some little dyes from them as well, either them or Amazon, but I think from them. And that's how I started. So I took the 100-gram skeins that I bought, and I just wound off little bits at a time. So this was 5, 10, probably 5 or 10 gram minis, and that's what I dyed up. And I just did some tonal, so I just kind of put the dye in. I did some by mixing it up in bottles, kind of what I do now, and some I just like speckled it on top. I don't know if I knew exactly how to speckle back them, but I probably just took some and put it in and that kind of thing, and saw what happened. And I thought it was so cool how right away off the bat I was dyeing yarn, and I was getting I was able to do things right off the bat that I was seeing in skeins and always wondering how it worked. It just, again, I'm a learner by doing, and it just clicked that way for me. And I will have links in the description box. I have a link to the FAQs website or page on my website, and on there I now have links to all of the tools that I use to dye yarn. So if you're curious about any of these things I'm going to talk about, head over there and you'll see links to the materials that I used at the beginning that I still use now. But I bought a few little square cake pans, and that's what I use for my minis still, actually, as well as like citric acid, teaspoons, that kind of thing, all things devoted to dyeing. So if you are dyeing with acid dyes, you can't then cook with anything that you use with the acid dyes, and so I bought like all new stuff for this, and I just use those little cake pans on my stove and just tested out little minis. And really, once I started, I couldn't stop. I just kept coming up with, I probably had 5 different color dyes, and I just kept combining them into different combinations. Tried a little bit of like faux self-striping versus speckled and tonals and variegated. I just tried it all and really just couldn't stop making those minis. And again, this was all on the Knit Picks Stroll like bear yarn. And so those skeins that I always used to do my testing and my learning on now have made their way into a northeasterly blanket that I am still working on. I still, like I said, I couldn't stop making the minis, and so they still some exist in the bag back here and are slowly making their way into the northeasterly blanket. But it was really fun. I will say that was like a good thing too, was yarn looks different in a skein than it does knitted up. And I think for me it was important not only to see how I could dye up skeins that I had seen in my mind and in person, but also what they would look like knitted up. So if I did such and such technique, how would that then knit up, and how would I get skeins that I liked knitted up? And so that's why I decided to start that blanket. I wanted to use those skeins because I needed to better understand yarn that I had used in socks. Like, how could I get that same effect? So that is what I did. So once I realized that dyeing was something that I really enjoyed, I was happy doing, and I knew it would be something I would want to do, make a business out of, and I researched everything, I opened up my Etsy shop. And at the beginning, it can be really hard early on to know what exactly you want to offer in your shop, and in some ways the market helps you determine that, but early on you don't necessarily have that. So when I started out, I dyed up all of my colorways on minis. So I was doing the exact same thing that I did during my learning phase, except I now did it on nicer base yarn with better and more dyes, basically. But I did dye up all of my samples that I took photos of on minis, which, looking back on, and I knew it at the time too, that it would be really hard to sell yarn using minis as an example, because one, when people are just scrolling through Etsy, they probably would have assumed that that's what I was selling, was minis, which was true. I sell yarn in any size skein, so minis are included in that. But people who were looking for 100-gram skeins would have just scrolled right past it. And so without a following or anything, I was really relying on my pictures to bring in customers on Etsy, and doing it with minis wasn't the best way to do that. But I still did it because I didn't know. It's hard to trust yourself early on. Now I know that if I love something, someone out there is gonna love it too. But at the beginning it can be hard to trust yourself, and I didn't know what to put out there. I didn't know what colors to put out there. I didn't know what products to put out there. And so I thought if I did more, then I'd be more likely to attract people, which is true. So at first I did my sample colorways on minis and I took pictures of them on my driveway, which is, it's not a bad background, a black driveway, concrete driveway. The hardest part about it was that the lighting had to be perfect. So for me, my house faces east, which means that the sun hits it directly in front of my house pretty early in the morning. So once the light was hitting it dead on, that meant that the colors would be completely washed out. And so I had to take my my photos pretty early in the morning before the sun came up over the house across the street. So as long as the sun was behind that house and the trees behind them, I would be good. And so that meant I had to do it on the weekends because I was already at work by the time the sun came up. And so I could only do it on weekends. And so if it was a rainy weekend, I couldn't take photos. And so that was hard because when you're new, you kind of want to get stuff out as soon as possible, and you know, you can't sell anything that's not listed. So that was hard. But again, over time that changed, and I no longer take photos on my driveway, but at the beginning I was. Another thing too is that I knew the whole time I needed to be taking photos on 100-gram skeins. I knew that that's what people would be looking for the most part, and that was also the best way to show off a color, just having more. And so I slowly introduced doing that. So at first my hesitation for it was that, again, I didn't know what colors would be popular. And so I didn't want to have a lot of stock sitting around. Again, I didn't have a following, so it wasn't like I would post something and it would sell. And so I really had to be choosy about which colors to dye up on 100-gram skeins, because it used up more of my inventory of undyed yarn, and the more that I used up of that, the more money I'd have to put up front to buy more. So eventually I just went for it and started dyeing up slowly on 100-gram skeins, and once they were dyed up on 100-gram skeins, I could then sell my any size skeins. So I have been dyed to order, other than for a little bit of time late last year. And so once I kind of have the photos, they're good to go. And then I just kind of expanded from there. So I would just come up with a new colorway on a mini, and then I would dye it up on a 100-gram skein. One interesting point though about dyeing up on 100-gram skeins, which is something that I have been doing. So every time I have new colorways, I dye them up on 100-gram skeins. At this point, inventory and stock is a little bit different than it was at the beginning, in the sense that my shop has grown. And so I always think about how it's like a double-edged sword dyeing up on 100-gram skeins, because yes, when people are scrolling through, that is what they are looking for and that's what they expect. And so they, you know, that's going to catch someone more than someone looking for 100-gram skeins would click on a mini and know that they can buy it in any size skein, which is also part of the reason why when you look on my Etsy shop, I have the any size skein banner on the top, which I will talk about in a future video, but at the beginning I did not have those on there, and so it was hard to communicate to people who didn't follow, who would just be scrolling through Etsy, what size skein I would have. Now that I have all the 100-gram skeins, I think about how when people are looking for minis, they probably scroll right on through because they're looking for photos of minis. And so I've pondered whether or not I should do separate listings for minis versus larger skeins, just to, you know, realize that people will click on photos that most represent what they're looking for. So just something interesting, that at the beginning I had all my photos on minis and all I wanted was to make them 100-gram skeins, and now they're all on 100-gram skeins, but I think of how I need some photos on minis. So that is something that I'm always wondering which way to go, and I think the 100-gram skeins is the right way to go in general, but now I should probably also add in the minis as well, which I do for my mini skein set. So you know, my mini skein sets, you can order the colors up to 100 grams but the photos will always be of minis because most people, when they look for mini skein sets, they look for actual mini skein sets and not like big sweater quantity fade sets. So kind of like what I alluded to before, things have changed. I've added in those banners. Again, I started dyeing up on 100-gram skeins, but at the beginning it was all about the minis for me, which I think is why I still continue to dye up so many mini skein sets and the gradient sets, because it's kind of like where I started, I guess, and that's what I enjoy doing with dyeing, so it kind of makes sense that that's kind of where I've stuck with it. And so anyway, that's how I started. I started with dyeing up lots of mini skeins on my kitchen stove with a select number of dyes, and from there I kind of started my business. So that is it for this video, a recap of how I started. We will be talking in future videos about kind of where I went from there, changes I have made, what I wish I knew at the beginning, and where I think I'm going from here. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any of these videos, and if you like this one, give it a thumbs up. And I will talk to you guys on Friday when I talk about my 2021 goals. So if you missed last week's video, I did a 2020 recap, reflections type of thing, so go check that out, as well as the why I started a hand-dyed yarn business if you haven't seen that yet. And also I will be having a shop update on Friday, January 8th. I will be having a shop update with lots of fun new stuff, Valentine's Day color and assorted goods, another new color, as well as entirely new products. So I would not want to miss this update. It's gonna go up on Friday, probably at 10 a.m. but either 10 a.m. or 2 p.m. You'll see announcements on Instagram. You can follow me there at agirlandherwool. And I will put a video up on Saturday probably that has kind of all of what's new, so you can catch that video on Saturday if you want to see as well. I will say all of the new items will be available at agirlandherwool.com, and you can use code agirlandherwool10 for 10% off your order anytime, not just on those items. That is an ongoing coupon code as a thank you for following me and subscribing here on my channel. So you can use that on any order you make at agirlandherwool.com until further notice, but I have no intention of taking it down. So anyway, that is it for today, and I will talk to you guys on Friday. Bye.